A $90 million dock treaty was seconds away from becoming Cashin Vale's death sentence when a most dangerous room in the Argent Customs house decided the fat delivery woman blocking the doorway was entertainment. Mara Whitaker stood under the gold security lights with a sealed courier bag strapped across her broad chest, her large soft body impossible to ignore in a room built for thin women in silk and quiet men with guns. Anika Voss, the luxury broker guarding the door like she owned the air itself, dragged her eyes over Mara's hips, stomach, and rain-damp delivery jacket before smiling. "Sweetheart, the freight elevator is downstairs. This floor is for people who don't have to apologize for taking up space." A few men laughed under their breath. Not loudly. No one laughed loudly near Cashin Vale unless they had already made peace with God. But the sound still pressed heat into Mara's face. She had heard versions of that sentence in hotel lobbies, embassy elevators, courthouse halls, and private clubs where women like Anika mistook cruelty for elegance. Mara did not lower her eyes. She only adjusted the strap biting into her shoulder and tightened her grip on the package she had been paid an emergency bonus to deliver. A velvet black case sealed with a silver V, addressed to Jasper Crane, private translator to the Vale table. Jasper Crane was missing. That was the first wrong thing. The second was the empty chair beside Cashin Vale. The third was the untouched obsidian headset resting beside an unsigned contract while 3 foreign brokers, 6 armed guards, and 2 silent attorneys watched Cashin as if waiting for the exact second a king became vulnerable. Cashin sat at the head of the long black table in a tailored suit that looked less worn than commanded. Pale, controlled, and devastatingly still, he had the kind of face people remembered right before they stopped speaking. He did not look desperate. Men like Cashin Vale turned desperation into other people's funerals. But Mara had spent years delivering sealed documents into rooms where rich men lied in 5 different accents, and she knew what panic sounded like when it was dressed as silence. Across the table, Mikhail Orlov lifted a glass of mineral water and spoke in smooth Russian to the man beside him. The nervous substitute interpreter swallowed and translated. "Mr. Orlov offers peace and shared access to Pier 17. Mara's fingers went cold around her scanner. That was not what Orlov had said. Not exactly. The Russian sounded polite, but buried inside, it was a legal phrase her mother had circled years ago in a battered brown vocabulary notebook. Transfer after removal. Mara's heart kicked once hard. Her body wanted to obey every cruel lesson the world had taught her. Step back, be quiet, make yourself smaller. Instead, she heard Orlov murmur in Italian, low enough for the substitute to miss. "After he signs, the port buries him." Cashin reached for the pen. Anika turned away from Mara, like the big woman at the door had already been erased. Mara moved before fear could stop her. The courier bag slammed against her hip as she stepped into the room, and every gunman turned. "Don't sign that," she said. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. The room died around her. Anika's smile fell apart. Orlov stopped breathing through his grin. Cashin's dark eyes lifted to Mara for the first time, not kind, not soft, but suddenly lethal with attention. "That clause doesn't give you shared access," Mara said. "It gives them control after your removal." The substitute interpreter went white. Cashin slowly set the pen down, and the tiny click against the table sounded like a gun being cocked. "Miss Delivery Woman," he said quietly, "what language did you just hear me die in?" The question landed harder than every laugh Mara had swallowed that night. For one breath, she saw the entire room measure her again. The size of her body, the cheap delivery jacket stretched across her shoulders, the scanner still blinking in her damp hand, the wide black sneakers leaving wet half-moons on a floor polished for men who never carried anything heavier than a signature. Anika gave a sharp little laugh, too late and too thin. "Cashin, please." She probably heard a word on some crime show and wants a tip. Mara kept her eyes on the pen near his hand, not on the guns, not on the cruel mouth of the woman beside her. "Russian first," she said, then Italian. "The contract says shared access in English, but the phrase he used means transfer after removal. It's not a peace clause. It's a succession trap. The substitute interpreter made a strangled sound, but Mara noticed his left thumb rubbing the inside of his cuff, fast and nervous, like a man trying to erase sweat before it became evidence. She had seen that gesture before in courthouse hallways when witnesses lied through their teeth. Cashin did not move. That was worse than shouting. His silence tightened every throat in the room. Mara's pulse hammered, but beneath it something older steadied her. Her mother's voice at the kitchen table, correcting pronunciation while Bill sat unpaid beside cold toast. Again, Mara, meaning is not what powerful men say. Meaning is what they hope no one hears. Mara had been 12 the first time she translated a landlord's threat for a crying neighbor. 15 when she realized people spoke freely around fat girls because they assumed shame made them stupid. 22 when the academy director looked at her scholarship papers, then at her body, and told her courtroom interpretation required a presence people could trust. Since then, she had delivered sealed envelopes to consulates, auction houses, immigration attorneys, and private clubs, learning accents through doors she was never invited to enter. She was not supposed to belong in the Argent Customs house. That did not mean she was deaf. "Open the case," Cashin said. No one understood the order at first. Then one of his bodyguards stepped toward Mara. Her fingers tightened around the velvet black package. "I need a signature before release," she said automatically. A ripple moved through the room, half disbelief, half insult. Anika blinked as if the delivery woman had just corrected gravity. But Cashin's mouth almost changed, not into a smile, something colder and more interested. "Whose signature?" he asked. Mara glanced at the label. Jasper Crane. The empty chair beside him seemed to grow louder. Cashin's eyes cut to the substitute interpreter. The man looked down too quickly. Mara saw it then, a tiny smear of silver wax under his thumbnail, the same shade as the broken seal on the emergency translation packet tucked beside his folder. She should have stayed quiet. She should have handed over the case and backed into the elevator where women like Anika believed she belonged. Instead, Mara lifted her chin, her large body planted in the doorway like a locked gate, and said, "That man already opened something he wasn't supposed to." Cashin finally stood, and every armed man in the room straightened with him. His gaze did not leave Mara. "How do you know?" he asked. Before she could answer, the substitute reached for his folder, and a folded slip of brown paper fell from inside it, marked with the same red shorthand symbols Mara had last seen in her mother's notebook. The red shorthand symbols hit Mara like a hand closing around her throat. They were not Russian, not Italian, not any language the men around the obsidian table would recognize as dangerous, and that made them worse. They were interpreter marks, the private kind her mother used when speed mattered more than beauty, sharp little cuts of meaning designed to survive fear. Cashin Vale looked from Mara to the substitute interpreter, and that tiny shift changed the temperature of the room. Chairs stopped creaking. Attorneys lowered their pens. One of Orloff's men moved his hand toward his jacket, then froze when Cashin's bodyguards adjusted their stance without a word. That was Cashin's power. He did not raise his voice. He simply decided where fear should stand, and everyone obeyed. "Pick it up," he said. The substitute stared at the brown slip on the marble floor as if it had become alive. "Mr. Vale, I can explain." "I didn't ask you to explain." Cashin's tone stayed calm, almost bored. "I asked you to pick it up." The man bent with trembling fingers. Anika watched Mara with a disgust that had lost its amusement. "This is absurd," she snapped. "You're letting a courier interrupt a treaty because she recognizes scribbles?" The word courier landed hard, but Mara did not step back. She felt the strap of her delivery bag cutting into her shoulder, the damp jacket clinging to her wide waist, the cruel awareness of how much space her large body occupied between the door and the table. But she also felt the floor under her feet, solid and level, and for once she refused to apologize for standing on it. Cashin's eyes returned to her. "Are they scribbles?" Mara swallowed. The safe answer was yes. The smart answer was that she didn't know. But the symbols were already arranging themselves in her mind the way her mother's lessons once turned panic into testimony. "No," she said. "They're compression marks. Interpreter shorthand. Not official, but consistent. This one means delayed possession. This one means witness removed. And this one, she stopped because the last mark had been pressed so hard into the paper it had almost torn through. Cashin saw the pause. So did everyone else. Say it. Mara looked at the substitute, then at Orloff, then at the empty chair meant for Jasper Crane. It means the speaker knows the translation is false. The room went so still the elevator cables hummed behind the wall. Cashin extended one hand, and an attorney placed a leather folder into it before the gesture was finished. Photographs slid into view. Peers, custom stamps, cargo manifests, private medical crates, luxury cars wrapped under gray tarps. Pier 17 moves 8% of the Atlantic gray market, Cashin said. Art, watches, vehicles, things governments ignore when the correct men are paid. His gaze settled on Orloff. If I lose it, I don't lose a dock. I lose the spine of my city. No one corrected him. Mara understood, then, why the substitute was sweating. This was not bad translation. It was execution with paperwork. Anika folded her arms, desperate to shove Mara back into a category she could control. And we believe all that because she runs packages for tips. Cashin ignored her. He stepped around the table and stopped a few feet from Mara, close enough that every guard watched her hands. His gaze dropped, not to her body the way Anika's had, but to the battered brown notebook half visible inside her courier bag. He did not touch it. He only saw it. Miss Whitaker, he said, and her name in his mouth made Anika go still. How many languages did your mother teach you to fear? Mara's fingers closed around the notebook's worn edge. Before she could answer, the substitute's folder slipped open, and a thin black receiver fell onto the floor, still blinking with an active transmission. From its tiny speaker, Jasper Crane's recorded whisper cut through the silence. If the delivery woman is there, remove her before she reads the second page. The receiver's whisper seemed to hang above the black table like smoke no one dared breathe. Remove her before she reads the second page. Mara felt I turned toward her at once, not with curiosity now, but with calculation. She had gone from inconvenience to problem in the space of one sentence. The substitute interpreter backed away from the blinking receiver, sweat shining along his upper lip. That isn't mine, he said too quickly. I don't know how that got in my folder. Orloff spread his hands with wounded elegance. Mr. Vale, this is becoming theatrical. A delivery woman appears, accuses your guests of treason, and suddenly mysterious devices fall from folders. How convenient. Anika stepped closer to Mara, her perfume sharp enough to cut through the room's cold air. He's right, she said, voice sweet and poisonous. Look at her. She walks in with a package. Here's a few foreign words, and now she wants to be the center of the most expensive treaty on the Atlantic. Mara's fingers tightened around the edge of her mother's notebook, but she kept her face still. Anika noticed the movement. Her eyes dropped to the worn brown cover peeking from the courier bag, and her mouth curved. Oh, is that your little script? Before Mara could step back, Anika reached in and pulled the notebook free. The violation was so small and so intimate that Mara's breath caught harder than if the woman had slapped her. Don't, Mara said low. Anika flipped the notebook open with manicured fingers, glancing at pages crowded with red shorthand, vocabulary columns, old court phrases, and Mara's mother's careful notes in the margins. How touching, she said. The big delivery girl brought homework. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Even some of Orloff's men looked away. But Anika was too drunk on status to stop. Tell me, Mara, is this how you pretend you belong in rooms like this? You carry a dead woman's notebook around and wait for important men to need you. Heat rose behind Mara's eyes, but she refused to give Anika the satisfaction of tears. Her body felt huge under the stare of the room. Every soft curve turned into evidence against her. Every inch of space she occupied treated like a crime. Anika stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough to make it crueler. Women like you don't sit at tables like this. You stand in doorways, blocking them, until someone tips you to leave. Cashin's glass touched the table with a soft click. Nothing else in him moved, but the room felt the change. His bodyguards went still in a way that promised violence later. Not yet. Mara saw his restraint and understood the test beneath it. If he acted now, Anika would become the story. If Mara acted, the truth might. "Give it back," Mara said. Her voice shook only once. Anika smiled and held the notebook above the untouched contract. "Or what? You'll translate me to death." Then her sleeve brushed the leather folder, shifting the brown slip Jasper had hidden there. Beneath it, Mara saw a second page half-tucked under the false treaty seal, marked with the same red shorthand symbol her mother had always used for one thing: deliberate witness disposal. Orloff saw her notice. His smile vanished. Anika, still watching Mara's face, began to tear the notebook page from its binding. Cashin's dark eyes stayed fixed on Mara, as if the whole room had narrowed to one question. Would she shrink, or would she stop them? Mara moved before the page could rip. Not wildly, not like a woman begging for mercy, but with the heavy, grounded force of someone who had spent years carrying locked cases through crowds that tried to push her aside. Her large body crossed the small distance between Anika and the table, and when Anika tried to step around her, Mara did not shrink. She planted herself between the broker and the contract, broad shoulders squared, soft weight settled low, immovable as a sealed door. Anika stumbled back half a step, shocked less by contact than by the fact that Mara had not apologized for it. "Give me my mother's notebook," Mara said. The room heard the change in her voice. It was still quiet, but it no longer belonged to the doorway. Anika's fingers tightened around the torn edge of the page. "You forget where you are." "No," Mara said, and her eyes flicked once to the false treaty seal. "You forget what I deliver for a living." With her free hand, she lifted the scanner still clipped to her wrist and angled its red beam over the silver wax pressed into the document. A thin electronic chirp cut through the silence. "Invalid custody sequence." The substitute interpreter flinched so hard his knees struck the chair. Mara heard it. Cashin heard it too. "High-value diplomatic and legal packages are sealed in layers," Mara said, keeping her body between Anika and the second page. "Outer wax for ceremony. Inner barcode for custody. If the silver seal was real, my scanner would read Jasper Crane as the last authorized handler." She turned the small screen outward. The name glowing there was not Jasper's. It was the substitute's. A murmur ran through the room, then died when Cashin lifted one finger. Mara used that silence. She reached for the notebook. Anika jerked it away, but Mara's other hand closed around the leather cover, not crushing, not snatching, simply holding with the strength of a woman who had hauled 50-pound courier cases up courthouse stairs when elevators broke and rich men complained she breathed too loudly. For one suspended second they stood locked together. Anika thin, jeweled, furious. Mara large, damp, humiliated, and refusing to disappear. Then Mara leaned close enough for only Anika and the nearest guards to hear. "Tier 1 page," she said, "and every symbol on it becomes evidence you destroyed." Anika's face lost color. Her grip loosened. Mara took the notebook back and pressed it against her chest, protecting it with the same body the room had mocked. She did not look at Cashin for approval. She looked at the second page. The red shorthand was incomplete, but the structure was unmistakable. Not a murder order. Not yet. A removal contingency, tied to a delivery window, a witness label, and a port code written in French abbreviation beneath the Russian clause. Mara swallowed the fear rising in her throat. "This page isn't telling them to kill you at the table," she said. "It tells them what to do if someone hears the real meaning before you sign." Orloff's chair scraped back. His calm mask cracked. "She is guessing." Mara looked at him then, and the room seemed to tilt around her. "No," she said. "I'm reading the part your translator forgot to hide." Cashin's eyes darkened, not with surprise now, but recognition. He turned to his men without raising his voice. "No one leaves." Every door in the Argent Customs house locked with a heavy mechanical thud. Mara looked down at the second page again, and beneath the witness code, she saw one more mark, pressed deep into the paper in her mother's exact shorthand. "Courier compromised." Courier compromised. Mara stared at the words until the red shorthand blurred, because for one horrible second the room, the guns, the treaty, even Cashin Vale disappeared, and all she could hear was her mother's voice telling her never to translate fear before she understood who planted it. Then Cashin stepped closer. Not enough to touch her. Enough that the nearest guard subtly changed position between Mara and Orloff's men. It was the smallest protection, almost invisible, but Anika saw it. So did everyone else. "Read it again," Cashin said. Mara lifted her eyes. "I did." "No," he said, quiet as a locked door. "Read it as if your life depends on being precise." The test was cold. Cruel, maybe, but Mara understood it. Men like Cashin did not survive by trusting a stranger because she sounded convincing. Around the table, people waited for her to break, to admit she had guessed too much, to step back into the safe, humiliating role they had assigned her. The fat delivery woman, the interruption, the body in the doorway. Mara pressed her mother's notebook against her chest once, then lowered it to the table beside the second page. Her hands were shaking, so she flattened both palms on the black surface until they stopped. "Courier compromised does not mean me," she said. "Not originally." The substitute interpreter swallowed hard. Cashin's eyes moved once to him, then back to Mara. "Explain." Mara pointed to the 3 marks beneath the phrase. "This symbol means package carrier. This one means substitute identity. And this one means forced credibility. Whoever wrote this expected a courier to be used as proof that the delivery chain was clean." Her voice steadied as the pattern opened in her mind. "Someone needed my uniform, my scanner, my arrival time, and Jasper Crane's missing signature to make the false treaty look legitimate." Orloff gave a soft laugh. "A touching story." Mara looked at him. "Then why did your man say in French that the large courier arrived earlier than expected?" The laugh died. The French broker at Orloff's right went pale. Cashin's gaze sharpened, not at the accusation, but at the restraint in Mara's tone. She was not performing. She was building a case. "You speak French too?" Anika said, but the insult had lost its teeth. Mara did not even look at her. Enough to know when someone is surprised, I'm not already dead. The room shifted, not loudly. Power never moved loudly at first. One attorney slowly closed his folder. A guard near the door lowered his eyes to Mara's scanner, as if seeing it for the first time. Cashin reached for the velvet black case, still strapped beneath her arm. Mara immediately stepped back. Every bodyguard tensed. Cashin stopped. For the first time, his face changed by a fraction. Respect, not softness. "Your boundary," he said. "Keep it." The words hit Mara harder than the mockery had. He was not asking her to be grateful. He was acknowledging that the thing in her hands was still hers to release. She drew a breath, scanned the case again, then turned the screen toward him. "If you want the headset open legally, you don't need Jasper." Cashin watched her thumb hover over the authorization line. "Who do I need?" Mara's mouth went dry. The answer was impossible, dangerous, and written in the custody chain glowing on her scanner. "Me," she said. "The emergency courier can authenticate if the intended recipient is missing and the room is under active threat." Silence swallowed the table. Cashin looked at her, then, as if the room had finally translated her correctly. Not invisible. Not inconvenient. Necessary. "Then authenticate it, Miss Whitaker." Before Mara could press her thumb to the scanner, every phone in the room buzzed at once. A message appeared on Cashin's screen from an unknown number. If she opens the case, her mother's death becomes public property. The message froze Mara's thumb above the scanner. For a second, she forgot the room was watching, forgot Anika's cruel smile, forgot Orloff's pale men near the doors, because the words on Cashin Vale's phone reached into the oldest bruise in her life and twisted. Her mother's death becomes public property. Cashin read it once, then turned the screen face down with terrifying calm. "Phone's on the table," he said. No one moved quickly enough. His bodyguards did. Within 10 seconds, every device in the room lay beside the unsigned treaty like surrendered weapons. "Miss Whitaker," Cashin said, "step away from the glass." She looked up and saw it then. The tall black windows overlooking the harbor, beautiful and exposed, the perfect angle from the adjacent customs tower. Her stomach dropped. He was not being possessive for the pleasure of control. He had just realized the threat was no longer inside the contract. It was aimed at her. Mara moved, but not behind him. She shifted to the side of the obsidian table, using her large body to shield the velvet case and her mother's notebook from Anika's reach, while keeping her eyes on the windows. Cashin noticed the choice. So did his guards. "I said away from the glass," he murmured. "I heard you," Mara said. "I'm not leaving my mother's notebook where they can grab it again." A low tension passed between them, sharp enough to make the nearest attorney look down. Then Cashin gave one small nod. "Then bring it." He led her not to an elevator, not to a bedroom, not to some dramatic cage disguised as protection, but through a concealed brass door behind the customs map into a narrow security corridor lined with old recording reels and modern surveillance screens. 2 guards followed. 3 tried to. Cashin lifted one hand, and only one remained. Anika started after them. "Cashin, you cannot seriously take a delivery girl into the archive vault." He stopped without turning. "You lost the right to decide where she stands when you put your hands on what belonged to her mother." The hallway went dead silent. It was not a crown. Not yet. But it was the first public line drawn around Mara's dignity, and everyone heard it. Inside the archive vault, the air was cold and metallic. Screens showed every angle of the treaty room, the harbor, the elevators, the service docks. Cashin locked the door, then placed his gun on the table between them, not as a threat, but as proof that danger had entered the same room with trust. "Open the case," he said. Mara looked at the weapon, then at him. "I'm not your employee." No, his eyes held hers. "You're the only person in this building I know they're afraid of." That should have sounded impossible. Instead, it steadied her. Mara pressed her thumb to the scanner. The velvet case released with a soft mechanical sigh, revealing the obsidian headset nested in black silk and a slim data key hidden beneath it. Before Cashin could reach for it, Mara lifted the key herself. "If this contains my mother's name," she said, "I hear it first." His jaw tightened, but he stepped back. "Fair." The word was quiet, dangerous, and more intimate than comfort. Mara inserted the key into the archive console. A folder opened on the screen. Crane, Jasper. Contingency audio. Beneath, it was a second file labeled Whitaker, Evelyn. Final correction. Then every monitor in the vault went black, and a red warning flashed across the glass. Courier authentication accepted. Eliminate witness protocol active. The red warning pulsed across the dead monitors like a heartbeat counting down to Mara's execution. Eliminate witness protocol active. For half a second, even Cashin Vale's face went still in a way Mara understood as danger, not fear. Then the vault door sealed behind them with a hydraulic thud, and somewhere beyond the walls, alarms began to whisper instead of scream, low and private, the kind of alarm designed for men who killed quietly. The guard at the door reached for his radio. Static answered him. Cashin's hand moved toward the gun on the table, but Mara was already staring at the console, at the custody chain glowing beneath the warning. "Don't shoot the system," she said. "It won't care." His eyes cut to her. "Then tell me what it wants." Mara's throat tightened. The words on the screen were not in English anymore. They rolled into French, then Russian, then a compressed string of courier protocol abbreviations. A system built by people who assumed no delivery woman would ever be the one reading it. "It thinks I opened evidence I was supposed to carry, not understand," she said. "It's locking down every exit tied to my badge." On the surveillance wall, one monitor flickered back to life. In the treaty room, Anika stood frozen beside Orlov while the substitute interpreter spoke rapidly into his cuff. 2 of Orlov's men were moving toward the archive corridor. Not running. Men like that did not run unless they want to panic. They walked with purpose, which was worse. Cashin stepped between Mara and the door. "Stay behind me." Mara looked at his back, broad and lethal in the vault's emergency glow, and something inside her almost wanted to obey. Almost. Then she saw the slim data key still mounted in the console, and the file labeled Evelyn Whitaker. Final correction beginning to delete itself line by line. "No," she said. Cashin turned. Mara moved past him, not fast, not graceful, but impossible to ignore, her large body forcing the guard to shift aside as she planted herself in front of the console. Her hips struck the metal table hard enough to rattle the obsidian headset, but she did not move away. She braced both palms against the desk, using her weight to keep the drawer beneath the console from retracting with the backup drive still inside. Pain shot through her thigh. She swallowed it. She had carried heavier things than pain for less important reasons. "Mara," Cashin said, his voice lower now. A warning. A plea he would never call one. "They're wiping her." Mara jammed her scanner against the console port. Invalid access flashed once. Twice. Then she remembered the battered notebook under her arm, the red symbols her mother had drilled into her until they became muscle memory. Final correction was not a confession file. It was an interpreter challenge. A last safeguard. Evelyn Whitaker had hidden truth behind mistranslation because she knew only someone trained to respect meaning would find it. Mara flipped the notebook open with shaking fingers and found the symbol pressed into the second page. Witness removed, speaker aware, correction delayed. Beneath it, in her mother's tiny handwriting, was a phrase in French. Not the elegant French of diplomats. Doc French. Smuggler French. Mara whispered it into the scanner. The screen went black. Then every monitor in the vault came alive at once. Evelyn Whitaker's voice filled the room, older, tired, unmistakably alive in memory. Jasper Crane altered the Veil Treaty records under order from Mikhail Orlov. If my daughter is hearing this, she is not the witness. She is the correction. Outside the vault, Orlov's men reached the corridor. Cashin raised the gun. Mara grabbed the backup drive just before the drawer snapped shut, pinning it against her stomach with both arms. On the main screen, a final document opened. Signed transfers, payment routes, Anika Voss's broker code, and Jasper Crane's authorization attached to Evelyn Whitaker's death file. Cashin looked at the evidence, then at Mara, and the cold in his eyes became something almost holy. "Open the door," he said. "Let them all hear it." The vault door opened on Cashin's order, and the first thing the treaty room saw was not his gun, not his guards, not even the evidence glowing across the archive screens. It was Mara Whitaker stepping through first, her large body framed by the brass corridor, one arm locked around the backup drive, her mother's battered brown notebook pressed against her chest, and the obsidian headset hanging from her hand like a crown no one had expected a delivery woman to carry. The room that had laughed at her fell silent, so quickly it felt rehearsed. Anika's face lost every trace of polish. Orlov's men stopped advancing when Cashin appeared behind Mara, calm and lethal, his pistol lowered but ready, his eyes fixed on every person who had thought Mara could be removed like a clerical error. "Play it," he said. Mara did not look to him for permission. She walked to the obsidian table, set the backup drive beside the unsigned treaty, and connected it herself. Evelyn Whitaker's voice filled the room again, thin with age, steady with truth. Jasper Crane had altered treaty records. Mikhail Orlov had paid for the false translation. Anika Voss had brokered the access codes through a luxury import network, using couture shipments and auction crates to hide payments that bought a woman's death and a port's betrayal. With each sentence, Mara translated the attached notes into English, then Italian, then Russian, then French, not because Cashin needed every word, but because every guilty person in that room deserved to hear their own language become a cage. Orlov tried to stand. Cashin did not raise his voice. "Seat." The word dropped him back into his chair. Anika made a small broken sound. "Cashin, this is being twisted. She doesn't understand what those codes mean." Mara turned to her, calm now in a way that felt earned. "I understand exactly what they mean. Your broker code appears on the payment route 3 times. You didn't just insult my mother's work. You profited from burying it." The color drained from Anika's lips. Around her, allies began stepping away, slow at first, then visibly. One attorney closed her file. A French broker removed his pin from Anika's lapel partnership. Orlov looked toward the doors and saw Veil guards already there. The collapse was not loud. It was worse. It was social, financial, permanent. Cashin's attorney placed 3 calls on speaker. By the first, Orlov's access to Pier 17 was suspended. By the second, Anika's bonded warehouses were frozen pending audit. By the third, every active contract touched by Jasper Crane's translation seal was declared contaminated until Mara Whitaker reviewed the language. Jasper's substitute interpreter lowered his head as if the table had become a courtroom. Anika whispered, "You can't let her decide that." Cashin finally looked at her, and the room seemed to shrink around his silence. "I don't let her," he said. "I trust her." Then he reached for the chair at his right hand, the empty one meant for Jasper Crane, and pulled it back. The sound of its legs against the floor carried farther than any shout. Mara felt every eye land on her again, but this time the weight was different. They were not measuring how much space she took. They were measuring how much power had just moved with her. Her thighs brushed the edge of the chair as she sat, her body soft, heavy, unmistakable, no longer blocking the doorway, no longer waiting to be tipped into leaving. Cashin opened the velvet case, lifted the obsidian headset, and placed it in front of her, not on her, not as decoration, but as authority. From this night forward, he said, no treaty at the Veil table is signed until Mara Whitaker hears it, translates it, and says the meaning is clean. Mara laid her mother's notebook beside the headset. And if the meaning is dirty, she said, her voice quiet but carrying through the room, I won't soften it for anyone. One by one, men who had ignored her lowered their eyes. Anika stood frozen in the place where she had once held Mara's notebook like trash. Orloff's empire did not burn in flames. It died in revoked access, frozen routes, silent phones, and doors that would never open for him again. Weeks later, at the first rebuild Veil negotiation, Mara entered through the front doors in a black tailored coat made to fit her body instead of hide it. The room stood when she arrived. Cashin waited beside her chair, dark-eyed and still, while powerful men placed contracts in front of her and waited for her approval before they dared speak over one another. The woman they had laughed at for taking up space had become the voice every empire had to pass through. If this moment gave you chills, like the video, subscribe for more dark mafia romance stories, and comment which scene made you respect Mara the most.